You smell that? I smell history. I smell chapter 13 history. Urban America. All right, just getting you ready for a test coming up. So the best method to do this is, well, take your class notes out. I got my class notes right here. So should you. We're not going to go line by line, but we're going to kind of talk about things in generalities. And everything I say will pretty much cover an underlined point. So if I go too fast, you hit the pause button, you catch up. But let's go. Chapter 13. Hold on, ready? Let's go. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Tech problems are just the worst, aren't they? Chapter 13 is about urban America, specifically starting with immigration. All right, we're a country of immigrants. If you think about it, in 1607, we had English immigrants coming over, and then large amounts of immigrants thereafter. But most immigrants were from Northern and West Europe until 1871. In 1871, we see a shift. That's a change from old immigration to new immigration. The key for the European side is that new immigrants came from Southern and Eastern Europe. Remember that? Or Northern and Western. So you can see there's a flip. What does that mean? That means different religions. Catholicism. That means different culture. All right. So a new influx of immigrants, because of the big wave coming after 1871, is from Southern and Eastern Europe. That's on the European side. Also, on the Asian side, we have a large amount of Chinese and Japanese immigrants. Okay, so coming from two sides, you can see this super sweet map has Southern and Eastern here, and then also the Japanese and Chinese immigration. All right, so things change. In general, the change starts at about 1871. Now, for the European immigrants, after their long, about a week-long voyage to the New World, they mainly came through New York City, and the immigrants were literally processed at Ellis Island. Now, on their way to Ellis Island or at Ellis Island, they get a good spot of a little gift from the country of France, that being the Statue of Liberty. So imagine that, leaving the old world with dreams of the new world, seeing that marvelous statue in New York Harbor and thinking to yourself, man, this is what I was hoping for. Well, that's the European side. On the other side, for Asian immigrants, they went through Angel Island. Same idea as in Ellis Island. They were checked for disease, they were documented, names were recorded, sometimes names were even changed. So it's happening both in Angel Island as well as in Ellis Island. Angel Island, California. Ellis Island is in New York. Okay. Angel Island specifically, San Francisco Bay. All right. Now, when they settled in the New World, well, they settled in ethnic cities. That kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That they would come over, so the people that they knew from Italy, they would settle in Italian neighborhoods, or from China and in a Chinatown neighborhood like there is actually today. So settled in cities. What about jobs? All right, what I'm about to do is just talk in general about some jobs that these immigrants had and where they came from. Don't stress too much about this stuff. Don't be freaking out making sure you have every little one, because they're a little complicated and they're not that super important. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. One that is kind of important is who built the Transcontinental Railroad. Primarily Irish and Chinese laborers. The Irish worked for the Union Pacific and the Chinese worked for the Central Pacific. Now, we did have large amounts of immigrants, these new immigrants, working in the Northeast, in steel mills and in textiles. Textiles is like clothing industry in New York City, and that's what we talked about later with the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. That's progressive movement stuff. We'll get to that in a bit. Coal mines. Now, who worked the coal mines? The coal mines well, Pennsylvania and West Virginia primarily, they were worked by Slavs, Italians, and Poles. See, that's my example. There's a lot of people that work the coal mines, okay? If you just get the idea that it's new immigrants that worked it, that's good. That works. That's cool. All right. Now, when these immigrants come to the United States, there's a big push for assimilation. Assimilation means blending in, right? You got people from all walks of life, from Asia, from Southern and Eastern Europe. And when they come to the United States, they look to blend in, right? We're not talking about this is totally specifically, I'm not an American, I'm a this or that. No, this is the melting pot idea. Melting pot means people come in from different backgrounds, different cultures, all mixed together. And what do you have? You have one big American soup. All right. Now, who was a big player in assimilation in making these immigrants blend in? Was a public school system, actually, because classes were taught in English, thus forcing the new immigrants to learn English. And also, you can look at things like the Pledge of Allegiance, as is being depicted in this picture. Pledge of Allegiance, literally pledging your faith, your allegiance, your loyalty to the United States of America. All right. Now, these immigrants worked hard to learn English. They worked hard to become citizens. They worked hard to adopt American customs. So assimilation is very important, all right? All right. Well, this is good. See, that all that stuff I just talked about, that's like the, isn't it great? You know, if we got immigrants coming in and they're doing all these great jobs and assimilation is good. Well, nativism pops up as well. If you remember, nativism means hostility towards immigrants. Native, as in the people that are native to the United States. In this case, that would be born in the United States, right? Now, lots of immigrants faced hostility from nativists. And we have a resurgence, means there's a growth in nativism because there's a growth in immigration. Now, why were they so fearful of the immigrants? Well, there was a bunch of reasons, but one would be because of jobs. These nativists worried that the immigrants would come and take lower paying jobs away from Americans who were born in the United States of America. That's one. The other reason is they were prejudiced. Prejudice were based on religious and cultural differences, specifically Catholicism, right? Because you have a large influx of Italian Catholics and then in other areas in Southern and Eastern Europe, and that went against the mostly Protestant United States of America. So there was a fair amount of anti-Catholic nativism, all right? Well, it's one thing if you have a bunch of people yelling, complaining, and, showing their hostility. It's one thing if it goes into action. It did go into action. Two sets of laws. First is the Chinese Exclusion Act. Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 says there will be no Chinese immigration for 10 years. And if you're Chinese and you're in the United States and you haven't become a citizen yet, you won't be able to. Okay? The Chinese that were already citizens, they were okay, but no more new Chinese citizens. I said 10 years, right? Well, the problem is the act kept getting renewed. It didn't get repealed until the 1940s. Okay, so there's hardcore legislation keeping the Chinese out, right? Also, the Immigration Restriction Act of 1921 established quotas. What it did is it used an old census that had less new immigration groups, and it checked in the United States, how many Italians are living in the United States? How many Hungarians are living in the United States? From that number, each year, 2% were allowed to come in. Well, the issue with that is they used an older set of data to find that 2%, and that lowered the amount of new immigrants coming in, and effectively, that restricted, look at the word, Immigration Restriction Act, that restricted, lessened the amount of immigrants coming from the southern and eastern parts of Europe. Cool, good? Yeah, great. All right, we got immigrants. Let's make a big shift. This is like a total, we're talking about something kind of related, but not really. Growth of cities. There's urban problems, guys. There's tenement housing, right? Because it's just simple. People are going into the city, and the city is not ready for as many people are living there. Okay, so these are very poor new immigrants, and they're living in a situation which is depicted here. This is a real photograph. I've counted it before. I want to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, maybe 7 people in this very small room. Tenement housing. Okay, overcrowded. Overcrowded also means disease, right? Another issue actually was transportation. So random. You think, man, bad, bad, bad. Well, there's good parts too. Good part would be the subway system. Subway system was designed in New York and Boston. Okay, this is fast city stuff. This is rapid urbanization. More people. We need subways. We need this. We need that. Okay. All right, totally shifting gears again. Remember Andrew Jackson had the spoil system. What the spoil system says is if you support the person who becomes president, you should get jobs. Well, James Garfield becomes president. Charles Guiteau thought, I'm a supporter, I should get a job. Garfield said, nah, you ain't getting a job. So Guiteau doesn't get a job. Well, he decides, well, the only thing I have left to do is, I don't know, kill him. So Guiteau assassinates James Garfield. When this all goes down, and people are saying, man, that's what's wrong with that spoil system, the whole situation's bad, the Pendleton Act is passed. And what the Pendleton Act says is that government jobs are available based upon qualifications rather than political support. So in a lot of ways, this ends the official spoils system. Pendleton Act does, all right? All right, shifting gears completely, we'll end with talking about African American life after Reconstruction. Start about economics. What's sharecropping? Sharecropping is when you don't have a lot of land, so you borrow someone else's land to grow crops, and at the end of the year, you share those crops. Well, there's a bunch of reasons we outlined in class that this just wasn't very profitable. There was competition with India. There was the fact that in some cases, the contracts that were signed weren't fair to sharecroppers. Now, not all sharecroppers are African Americans. There was some poor whites that were sharecroppers as well, but it was predominantly African Americans. Okay, so sharecropping, no good. Doesn't work out too well. Also, there's lots of intimidation going. This is the era of the Ku Klux Klan, which will be around for a while. That is intimidating African Americans for using their 15th Amendment right. Mr. Spicer, oh, that's the right to vote? Yeah, the right to vote. African Americans get the right to vote, but the Ku Klux Klan uses intimidation. One tactic that is used is lynching. A lynching is a mob execution without court proceedings. So there's no court involved, right? There's no judge, there's no jury. This is a group of people, right? Now, predominantly, that means they mainly happen in the South. They mainly happen to African Americans, and the main form of execution was hanging, all right? Well, not everybody's going to be in support of lynching, and we'll get to that in a second, okay? All right, another things. We got black codes / Jim Crow laws. What's the difference? Here's the difference. Well, first of all, what are they? They are segregation of the races in public places. It's like hotels, railroads, bathrooms, water fountains, as shown in this picture here, okay? Now, black codes are those segregation laws during Reconstruction. Jim Crow, those segregation laws after Reconstruction. Quick little distinction for you, okay? Now, black codes, like I said, Jim Crow laws are legalized segregation in public places. Okay, many people thought that it violated people's 14th Amendment, which is full citizenship, equal protections. Like, hey, if I'm a citizen, how can you do things like have the white water fountain and the colored water fountain here, right? So we got to test them. Well, they got tested in the case Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson is 1896. African-American named Homer Plessy is in Louisiana. He intentionally gets on to the whites-only car of a train, right? This is a depiction of it. It's a very unfair and biased depiction that showed up in the newspapers shortly thereafter. But he gets on in the whites-only section, so they arrest him. Case goes up to the Supreme Court. What does the Supreme Court say? The Supreme Court says this is a case of separate but equal, saying that segregation is okay as long as it's equal. Well, the problem is, as shown in this picture, usually the facilities were not equal. But besides that, the Supreme Court says in Plessy versus Ferguson, Jim Crow laws can be upheld. Segregation, that's the law of the land, because that's what the Supreme Court said, right? Man, 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. We are going to be fighting this battle until the late 1960s, all right? But it all gets set up in Plessy versus Ferguson. Let's go 2 dudes and 1 chick. Okay, if we're talking about African Americans after segregation and the leadership in the African American community, a big one is Booker T. Washington, right? Washington's big belief is that the best thing for African Americans wasn't to stress about the Plessy versus Ferguson stuff. Rather, it is to get more African Americans employed. He believed in vocational training, right? So you get a job, work hard, make money, and that's how African Americans will rise in society, right? He founds the Tuskegee Institute for just that purpose. So Booker T. Washington is like concrete jobs, vocational training, right? Not such, abstract things, more concrete stuff like tilling a field, stuff like building a building, doing plumbing, etc. W.E.B. Du Bois is going to reject him. W.E.B. Du Bois thinks all this stuff you're talking about, it's meaningless without equality. He's going to push for civil rights and political equality. And later he's going to form the NAACP, or help form the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, W.E.B. Du Bois. Okay, so he rejects Washington. Last one is Well, there he is. He's old. There she is. Last one is Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells leads an anti-lynching campaign, and she called for the federal government to take action. Because of what she did, less lynchings happen. So Ida B. Wells is anti-lynching. Hang around, and let's do chapter 14.